would like to remind the council to refrain from asking questions till the staff presentations are complete. Council, it's 3.1. You'll receive the presentation on the cost, savings, back pay for the LED streetlight conversion project. Funding options will also be discussed. Our city traffic engineer, Luke Albert, and our finance director, Doug Sanson, presenting. Gentlemen.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Tonight, Doug and I will present the LED streetlight conversion project, which is a follow-up to our presentation in January, which was the LED streetlight audit. First, we'll discuss phase 1 of the project, which is the results of the audit and the pilot. Next, we will discuss phase 2, which is the LED conversion. And then we'll discuss the cost and savings associated with the project, and Doug will present the funding options. Our ultimate desire from tonight's presentation is to seek policy direction on whether or not to move forward with this project, and if so, when. In January, council approved $100,000 for the streetlight audit and pilot project. And then between February and April, each streetlight pole and fixture was inventoried in the field, and a GIS database was provided to the city. And also the replacement LED fixtures were selected that maximize energy savings and provide good lighting. And then in May, 153 pilot project fixtures were installed in the Sedea and Estrella neighborhoods and also along Litchfield Road. And resident concerns resulted in a handful of phone calls, but those concerns were addressed.
Good.
And then in June, the guaranteed energy savings, the APS rebate amount, and final project costs were provided to the city. This slide shows a timeline that would make the city eligible to receive the APS rebate if we decide to pursue that option. In July and August, the fixtures would be purchased and delivered. And then between August and October, the fixtures would be installed. And then by the end of October, all of the APS rebate documentation would be submitted. But we'll make sure to also submit, throughout the project, the APS rebate documentation will be submitted as they're installed, but we'll make sure that all of the final documentation is done by the end of October. And please keep in mind, this is a very tight timeline, so if we decide to pursue the APS rebate option, we need to move quickly. The total cost of the project is just under $2.8 million. This is less than what was presented in January because we do not have any pole replacements in there. Initially, we had some older poles being replaced. Those will be handled either through the city's asset management program or through CDBG funding. Then the total annual savings is $414,000, resulting in a payback of 6.7 years. And then if the APS rebate is pursued, the payback would reduce to about 6.2 years. And the warranty on the project is 10 years, and the expected life of the streetlight fixtures is 10 to 15 years. And with that, I'll turn over to Doug to talk about the funding options.
Thank you, Luke. Funding options, what we have before you is 3 different funding options that we would be looking at. The first 2 of them is if we decided to move forward right now in order to get that $200,000 APS rebate associated with the project. And as Luke said, the timeline on that, it's a very tight timeline. So we would have to move forward very quickly on that. The 3 of them are the financing as a tax-exempt lease purchase, utilizing Amoresco as our agent on that, utilizing our CIP cash reserves, which is paying cash for it. Or if we forego the APS rebate, we would put the project into the normal CIP process and then weigh it against everything else. I will go through each of these individually. The numbers that you're going to see on here are based on a total project cost of $3 million, which is slightly higher than what Luke had said, and utilizing a 4% interest rate. We've gotten some numbers that are a little bit less than that, so it's relatively conservative numbers that you'll be seeing. The first one is moving forward with the project right now, utilizing financing as a tax-exempt lease purchase. On an annual basis, as Luke said, between electricity costs and O&M, we would save about $400,000 a year. We would structure debt that would be about $400,000 a year. So it would be a 10-year timeline, and it would end up breaking even as far as operating costs go until the 10 years is done. From the 10-year point on, that's when we would see the actual operational savings. The estimated life of the product that we're looking at is between that 10 to 15 years, so we would see some operational savings on that. Luke can go into more later on if you have any questions about what the real life of the product is. We would receive that $200,000 rebate, assuming the project got done as anticipated and there were no hiccups in the process. Total interest costs we'd be looking at would be $500,000 to $700,000. And that would be the discrepancy between Luke's 6.7-year payback. That's paying cash. Once you put interest in there, it takes it to a 10-year payback period. There would be minimal or no direct ongoing savings until the end of that lease term, as I stated. However, there would be a positive operational impact because Luke and his staff do have to manage that contract on the maintenance and operations of these. With all new products, they would not have to be doing that. The financing, as I said, with this tax-exempt lease purchase would be through Ameresco or a partner of Ameresco's. And I did talk with our financial advisor about the rates that they would be charging, and they said they've just recently did a study with somebody else, and the rates that through Ameresco are slightly higher but still competitive. Number two would be utilizing our CIP project reserves. If council recalls, through our process of the budget and the CIP this year, we set aside funds so that we could really go through our CIP this fiscal year, early in this fiscal year, and then allocate money to projects once we have a real scope and a real budget associated with them. This would take and put this project at the front of the line, allocate some of those CIP project reserves to the LED streetlight program. The overall CIP project reserve is $38.2 million. However, the general fund portion of that, which would be utilized here, is $9.1 million. So that would reduce the amount of general fund CIP project reserves down to about $6 million were we to pursue this option. The benefits of that are that we would immediately see that $400,000 annual operational savings. It would free up ongoing general fund revenue. We would receive the $200,000 APS rebate, provided we hit the tight timeline. Downsides to this are this project is not prioritized against every other project in the CIP. It would bring it right to that front of the line, and it would reduce available funding for all other projects. And then the final option that we have presented is to forego the $200,000 APS rebate and put this project into the normal CIP process, prioritize it, weigh it against all the others, really understand what the impact of it is on those other projects. The benefits of that would be we would be able to prioritize that against other projects. We'd be able to fully evaluate all project and funding options. As I stated, under the tax-exempt lease purchase, our financial advisor said it is pretty competitive, but it would give us the option to look at different types of financing for it as well as to consider cash, interfund loans, and different types of projects that we would not be able to do given the tight timeline of the APS rebate. And then, as I stated, this would forego that APS rebate of $200,000. And I'll turn it back to Luke.
Thank you, Doug. As mentioned previously, we're seeking policy direction on moving forward with the project and funding options. And with that, we'd like to open up for questions and discussion.
Great, thank you. All right, who would like to start? Councilman Basillo?
It's my recollection, as a result of the budget, there was $600,000 of one-time money that was added. Remember that when the budget was updated, there was $600,000 of new money that was not part of the budget. Is that accurate? If I recall, it was about $600,000.
That's in the state shared revenues?
Yes.
We're planning on getting an additional $600,000. However,
Right.
we did not modify our budget to account for that.
Right.
But in actuality, we will be receiving about $600,000 more in state shared revenue than anticipated.
And the reason why I mention that is if the total cash price is $2.7 million, that was money that we weren't anticipated. I would throw that money toward, now you're down to 2.1. From my perspective, if there's that kind of savings and returns, instead of having it eat up by interest payments, I would rather take the cash so that we have a true $400,000. Because anything we can do with one-time money to bring down operational costs long-term, in my humble opinion, is a good thing. So that would be right off the bat, we'd start saving $400,000 a year in operations by doing an investment up front with cash. I don't like it getting diluted by my perspective by borrowing money, even though, you know, it saves us a little bit, but I'd like the full benefit of on that. The only question I have is if that 7 million comes from, that 2 point whatever million comes from that 900,000, what could be possibly some of the priorities that would be set aside? But I'm always a firm believer, if you can take lump sum money to reduce an operating cost over long-term, in this year, 10 plus years, I think that's a good thing.
Any other comments? Councilman Stiff?
Trying to get my head around we're doing this expediently so we can take advantage of the APS rebate. Is that correct?
That would be one of the options. If you were looking for a recommendation, the recommendation of the Finance Department would be that we would delay this until the CIP process and really truly evaluate it, as well as the other funding sources, as Councilmember Pizzillo brought up.
Okay, but that was all going to be my ultimate question, so I appreciate the advance on that. My concern with doing this right now with cash, however we assemble that 2.7, is we are going to knock off of our CIP a number of projects. And a number of those projects are things that we have been committing to our residents for a number of years, roadway projects, et cetera. And if we don't know, as the staff is taking the next year to fund the 5-year CIP from this point forward, I would hate to put any of that in jeopardy until we know. I vacillate on this. Maybe we should just finance and move it forward, but I think the financing costs of this over the period of time, the total financing cost is,
That was,
I think you said it was 800,000 or something.
$500,000 to $700,000.
There you go. So that's an awful lot of interest to pay on a project. So my position is that we hold this up against the other projects. And I just beg of staff, when you're looking at those projects, to please look at what we have been promising for a number of years to the residents as far as roadway work goes, and then hold that up against this. Because if we delay one of these projects that we've already delayed a number of times, particularly the Saraville, Yuma, that whole corridor, Van Buren from Estrella to Saraville or beyond, I think we're going to be, we really have done a disservice, so thanks.
Yes, Sherry? Councilman Loretano, excuse me.
Yeah, I guess I agree. As the 500,000, that's a lot of interest. So I'm not real keen on that idea. That seems like a lot to rush through, and then we're not really getting the savings right away. It's a really good idea. I've seen some of the lights in our neighborhood. I think they're wonderful lights. I don't know if maybe if the APS rebate is worth putting all that cash up front and taking it from the other projects, or if a phased-in approach to do this might be a better way. I think that's kind of what Bill was kind of alluding to. That's where I took from that. Because same thing, if we're going to rush and put, 2.7 million to get these lights, and then we can't do anything else with the CIP this year, I guess that's the problem. We still would have an incremental savings, if I'm correct, even if we did it in some sort of phased-in approach. Would there still be some sort of savings?
Mayor Laura, Councilmember Loretano, the 400,000 per year would be the entire city. So then half of the city would be about half of that. It would just kind of, any phasing you do would just reduce by about that percentage.
Yeah, I guess that's where I kind of am, because I don't want to pay $500,000 to get $200,000. That doesn't seem like it's a good. it doesn't seem like it's a good balance there. So maybe if we could find a balance to fit this in with the CIP, I guess we don't get a portion of the rebate. It's got to be the whole thing or not. I don't know how that works.
The rebate will be based on the amount of lights you replace. So it's also, the rebate's based on like total energy savings. So if you did half the city, you would get about half the rebate.
Okay.
So there's option to do part of the rebate as well.
Okay, so we could be incremental, like what Bill was saying, and still recoup some costs incrementally.
We could, and that would take council action at our next council meeting to accelerate immediately to move into that, utilizing either the CIP project reserves or some level of debt associated with that. Because in order to get any portion of the rebate of this current program, it has to be by that November 1st date.
Okay.
Councilman Hampton?
Yeah, and just to go off that same, and it's not to say that the APS rebate wouldn't happen next year. We just don't know that it's not available yet, correct?
APS has changed their rebate program to focus on saving energy for like daytime peak period usages, and street lighting saves money at night during off-peak. So with the way they've changed the rebate program, it's fully expected to terminate November 1st of this year.
Okay. So then, I guess my other questions are, so this idea was originally created for the cost savings, or was there a public demand? I can't remember the genesis of this project.
It's the cost savings was what we do have residents that say they like more lighting. There's no doubt about that. But the timing of the project and bringing it forward when we did was because of the cost savings combined with the APS rebate. This is why we brought it to you in January, and now we're following up this time.
Okay. I think I agree with some of the group here as well. I think if we were going to do it, I think option 2 is better than the finance version. But I think I'm leaning more towards the funding it, balancing it, looking to prioritizing against the other promises that we've made to the public with the other CIP projects. If we do go a partial, I'd probably, the only group of citizens I can think of right now that have been demanding more light, just from my perspective, is maybe historic Goodyear, and that areas down there would want it the most right away if we were going to go to a partial. But I think for me right now, it'd be the probably option 3 to balance it. Look at everybody else's. Look at the rest of the CIP projects, so we don't skip over something that we've been, like other people said here, promising the rest of the citizens.
Vice Mayor?
How many poles are we talking about?
We have about 9,100 lights.
9,000 poles?
9,100 fixtures. Some poles have 2 fixtures, some have 1, but the total number of fixtures is 9,100.
And you have to replace all of them?
There's very small replacements that have been done very minimally, like in Canada Village. There's LED lights now as part of the project that was completed there for the CDBG. But what remains is 9,100 to be replaced.
And that's just Goodyear City lights. That's not lights that are in HOAs that they own the streets and the lights. Correct.
Vice Mayor, that's correct. This is just the publicly city-owned lights.
All right. And you talked about you got feedback from the 153 pilot lights that you put out. What was the feedback?
We received a handful of phone calls and installed a couple of shields for the backlighting. That was primarily the concern, was like you're seeing that light from a certain angle, put a shield up. But we only installed 2 shields on the whole project.
And that was only in Sadea?
1 in Sadea and 1 in Estrella.
You did put lights up in Estrella?
Lights were put up in Estrella, and 1 shield was put up in there as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, because I asked about that at one of the council meetings, because I drove Sadea to see the lights, and I didn't know you put them in another one, because I had asked to put lights in North Subdivision. Okay. All right. Well, and then my last question is, have you done any determination as to what CIP projects would be dropped? Or it's just, you're saying that because if you put this in the number one, everybody else falls down the row?
That's exactly what I'm saying. We have
Okay.
not done any kind of evaluation on it. It's just that this would automatically place it at number one, and
Okay.
it would take that money away.
And I know that the hope is that CBDG funds will be available for the historic Goodyear, and we've been talking about this for 9 years, getting the lights there. So hopefully in the next 9 years we'll be successful, because we don't want to.
Wait a minute, is it
It's-
9 years?
Yeah, 9 years. Eight and a half years I've been asking for them in
Oh, you've been
historic.
asking for them, okay.
Yeah, that they have said, they have come and said, you know, it's dark, we want more light. And I thought maybe that would be a great place for the LED light. But in looking and talking with you, because they're old fixtures, we have to redo them. They can't just go and change out bulbs, is what I'm saying.
Vice Mayor Campbell, that's correct.
Yeah.
It's the post-top fixtures. They do make post-top fixtures for LEDs, but we did confirm the CDBG eligibility for this type of
Right,
project.
we know we're
So-
eligible, we just
So
have
the
to
full
be.
replacement would be,
Sure.
yeah.
So we could go for the full pole replacement as well as the lighting for that, correct?
Vice Mayor Campbell, that
Perfect.
that would be a CDBG eligible project, yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you.
Councilman Cato?
There was a great article about the LED lights in the June In Focus magazine, and understand that there's been a number that have already been replaced, and that in parks, they're already replacing them as they come due. So I'm just curious how long it would take to replace them with the normal replacement period.
Councilmember Kano, we've done them at traffic signals, so, maybe about 400 or so or something like that, but once again, a very small number relative to the total number of fixtures need to be replaced.
Yes, Councilman Stiff?
For the pilot, how many light fixtures did we swap out?
Councilmember Stipp, it was 153 fixtures.
Do we have a cost per fixture?
The cost per fixture it averages to about $250 to $300 a fixture, based on the 9,000 and the $2.7 million. It includes a few other things, but that's a round number.
Now, we've been talking about, incremental change out and whatnot. And, you go, well, let's do 1,000 a year. Well, it's going to take us 9 years to change them all out.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a little bit, it'll obviously be a multi-year project if we decide to, do this incrementally over time. Obviously we'll need to move that forward because eventually we want to try to recoup the energy savings. Have we changed our build standard that when new roads go in, that they're required to have these LEDs?
Councilmember Stipp, that was part of the engineering design standard change was brought before in August or September last year
Okay.
to include the LEDs. So all new neighborhoods will have the LED lights.
Perfect. Thanks.
Councilman Pizzillo?
Yeah, my only concern is figure out where the CIP, as I mentioned earlier, would be hit as a result of if this went toward, and like Councilmember Stitt mentioned, you're not going to do 9,000 in 1 year. So at some point, this is going to be spread over a period of time, depending on how much manpower I would think you have. But the biggest concern I have is I'm against borrowing money and eating up that interest rate to save on the operations and whatever. To me, it's a cash issue if you have the cash and then reap the savings over that 10-year period of time or whatever it may be. But that I'm adamant about as far as borrowing money. To me, it doesn't seem to pencil out if you're borrowing to do it, to get the cash. If you have the cash, that's not affecting the other CIPs.
Councilman Loretano?
I do have one more question, more about the aesthetics rather than the money, because I've seen one of them up in Estrella, and it does make a lot more light, which is very nice. But does that affect the dark skies up there, or is that something we want to consider before we transfer them over?
Councilmember Loretano, there's no uplighting from these LED lights, so they're brighter, but it's directed down at the street.
Oh, okay.
So you're going to have less uplighting than you do from the HPS fixtures, because this is very much directed right at the street.
Okay, because there's one on our corner and it is just, it's great. I thought that was my question. Would it affect some of the lights? But thank
Yeah,
you.
no uplighting.
Good.
Any other questions from the dais? Councilman Hampton?
I'll just reiterate, yeah, I mean, if we were to do a phased approach, or if we want to do partial, yeah, I think at Canada Village, Historic, and North Side Division would be the number one places that I would think. If they already have it, that's great. And then if we do a partial, get the benefit, and then the rest of it, the CIP. But that's just my thought.
Well, I'm the last to speak. Just be aware that other cities have completed it. I think the one was Avondale. And they made it hit the papers, and so it is out there from the other cities, and they are doing them and completed. So I just wanted to, I do, the problem that bothers me is we've spent time on this CIP and trying to fund some projects, and that concerns me, that we would take away maybe a small project, but it was important to us somewhere because we voted on it. So that's my concern. I mean, we win and lose on this because we're going to lose this money. And like you say, the interest rate is somewhat a loser. So I'm kind of like this on it. But just tell the council there will be conversation when you leave this dais and out in the community. You will be asked why. And so we need to be clear on why we've decided to delay this, because it sounds to me like the majority here is in the favor of that. So, yes, Councilman Stipp?
Mayor, I think one of the things that we tend to fall victim to is the comparison. Avondale did it. Why shouldn't we? I think when you compare the number of roadway miles that the city of Avondale has compared to the number of roadway miles we have.
You're
So
absolutely
for those
right
that
on
are listening,
But that won't stop the conversation. I just
Correct.
want you to be aware of it, that it has been something they used this year as one of their great accomplishments, so.
but for anyone listening, I think we're like 3 times the number of roadway
Yes,
miles that
they
that
don't,
the
they
city
don't
of
have the
Avondale
land that
has.
we have yet to go.
So when, we're not really talking about apples and oranges when it comes to that, but I agree with everything else, everything that you said.
Councilman Vasilla?
I think delay is probably the wrong word. I think the better word for it is due diligence, because we don't have all the information, because you have a CIP where money was set aside to fill. So until you find out where that money's going, it doesn't make any sense to jump the gun and put money somewhere what may be taken away from somewhere else. So do the due diligence, and then we can make a decision on what we want to do. That's the way I see it. I don't see it as a delay. I see it as getting more information, make sure what's possibly going to be impacted if we take this $2 million or $2.7 million out of that general fund that's set aside for CIP. So that's how I kind of see it. I don't see it as us postponing. I see it as getting more information so we can actually make a good, solid decision.
But it does postpone it some time frame. Okay, so can't use postpone it if we're not going to go that. But I know what you're saying. It's nice to have the full information and to be sure of where that money could be used instead of at this point. So I think that's kind of got the word without us voting. But I really appreciate the presentation. I think we learned a lot by it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, since we're going into another meeting, I'm not going to ask for information items, so I'm now going to adjourn this meeting, and then we're going to start the CFD meeting. So this meeting is adjourned. Oops, excuse me.